Good afternoon all, and welcome to day 3 of the security conference. I want to just start with a reminder, please place any questions that you have in the Q&A button, and I'd like to introduce my colleague Ben Chapman, who is our Head of Architecture and Engineering, and welcome to good old-fashioned basics. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Paul, and looks like everything's working technology-wise, so that's excellent. Thank you for joining me for the good old-fashioned basics. Bit early perhaps for an old-fashioned. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the bits that I want to cover. Some bits around some security concepts, reminders about to keep track of your assets, a bit of advice on monitoring and logging, a few tools along the way that I've identified. For those that might have seen me before, I always have a go at DNS. So please just bear with me if you've heard it before. But if you've got any questions, please reach out and put it in the chat. I also want to try and show you some of the things that Jisc can do, just to remind you. So whenever I'm thinking about anything that we're doing in engineering, we need to make sure that we cover things like the CIA triad, the OSI stack, and people, process, and technology. So for those that don't know the CIA triad, it's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems. If you have a public website, you'll want to have basically no confidentiality. It's public after all, but you need to make sure it's fully available and has full integrity. You don't want anyone changing or defacing your website. But if you had something like medical records, then you need to move a lot further up in requirements, like maximum confidentiality, strong integrity, but reduced availability. You can only have one with the other. You've got to sort of have your sliders around. And so to help sometimes to think these through, sometimes it's nice to ask your dad. That's how I'm trying to remember it anyway. Disclosure, alteration, and destruction, the opposite. Think about how it might be the other way around, if that helps you with your product or your design or your infrastructure or anything that you're working towards. Maybe you want to make it more disclosed. Maybe you do want it more confidential. Would you like it to have high integrity, or do you want to make sure that you can alter it? What about destruction? If you were sharing a folder in SharePoint, for example, and you give somebody read and write access, be sure that you are happy with the possibility that they can destroy it. They could delete it. So just think about that when you're moving through your processes, and the CIA triad and your dad can help you. The OSI stack is something that I hope most of you are familiar with. It's certainly that was driven into me even many years ago at school. But the bit that often is forgotten about, or more often the reason that we talk about layer 8 is complaining about picnic and problem in chair, not in problem is, oh god, now I can't remember what it is when put on the spot. Problem picnic, problem in chair, not in star. I can't remember, you know what I mean. But we're not often moaning about the users, but it's your responsibility to make sure that you're you're training your users. Remember that layer 8. So here's some advice. I'm just going to quickly copy these into the chat, so you guys can take these links away with you. So I'll just copy these now. I'll put them in the discussion forum. Oh, good, it hasn't copied and pasted the URLs. Right, well, I'll get back to that in just a minute to make this a bit more smooth. So the NCSC has training courses available that you can download and modify for yourselves. The board toolkit is fantastic to help you encourage how your senior staff can understand cybersecurity. The Jisc 16 questions also helps your senior staff to ask the right questions of your IT staff. And the SANS Institute offers a range of free policy templates to help you with your setting things up for the first time. If you've got new policies you want to define, or if you're not sure what policies to create, then these are areas that can help you these are a great place to start. Download a copy, and then you can use that as an initial template and work your way through for your own business needs. People, process, and technology. So people are your most important asset. They're the ones that are going to be making those decisions. If you want to make something automated, you need to understand that process first. You need to have a manual process, and then your technology comes along after that to help you with your systems. Just like the CIA triad, you need all three for successful operations. When one of them is weak, it affects all the others. It's also extremely useful if you're trying to work on something new, like a business case, a presentation, strategies, risks, targets. It helps you focus, it helps you start. If you think about the people, the process, and technology, that will help you at the beginning of your presentation, and help you focus on what things you might want to sort of things that you want to talk about. It helps you be holistic, because in pretty much all cases, all three of those things will help cover everything that you want to present. Assets and identity are often forgotten about. Why engineers run the CSTM SIEM service, and often when people are onboarding, it's only the first time they're starting to think about what their systems are, and where they are, and their criticality. If you have those things in advance and you keep on top of them and you maintain them, it will mean that you know what is where. Now, often what you'll do is you'll ask your staff, could you tell me the criticality of this service? You're going to speak to finance, you're going to speak to MIS, and of course their answers will always be, yes, these are the most critical systems. So you'll need to also have a balancing act and agree them with your senior staff to identify and agree a real priority list through your system. If you include your users in that, then you'll also create a better picture and build a model of your systems that means that you're rebuilding or replacing, or you can respond to an incident more effectively in terms of the order of recovery. The Active Directory, of course, can help find your assets straight away. It's good if you've got some nice structures in your OUs for Active Directory, for example. So you could have a bundle that's called student, bundles for staff in different departments. You could have OUs that cover service users, that sort of thing. So you just make sure that those things will help you find them. But what about some of maybe of your more sort of weird or wonderful stuff or critical assets that hopefully you're not putting in Active Directory? Your hypervisors, your backups, don't include them in those authentication areas. Use different authentication for those. But you do still need to be able to find them. So you can have things like telescopes or medical equipment or IoT. How are you going to find them? So scanners can help. Centralized buying and reporting will help. Keeping your SIEM up to date. And don't forget that you need to also know where all of your cloud assets are. So what does ANI help you with? It helps you with your backup strategies. If you don't know what is important, how can you know what to bring back? If you don't know what is important, you don't know how long to store it for. When you're replacing your backup systems, how long do you want to store something? You can't, in most cases, back up your entire estate. You'll need to make decisions on what is most important, and that's where ANI will help. The same for your SIEM. If your SIEM, to make your SIEM effective, it needs to tell you whether it's critical or a high or a medium, so that it can give you the right kind of alert. If you define everybody and everything as critical, you're going to get a lot of alerts. What about your warranty or your budget planning? When a system's going to expire, when are they going to go end of life? When do they go end of sale? So that you can start preparing for replacements. All these things will help you towards your budget planning. What about monitoring? So in my group at Jisc, we use a range of different pipelines and automation to maintain our estate. So we use CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment. And this helps with orchestration and building the monitoring tools right from the start. So we use a combination of systems. So we will use LibreNMS, for example, to provide us tracking over time. I recommend Sensu. This is not a free product, unlike quite a lot that are on that tool, on that list. But Sensu has a bit like a store, and there you can add or search, for example, Infoblox appliance or Dell hardware, and it will brand and identify and tag your systems so that you can more easily find them. And it will present the formatting of, say, SNMP data in a way that makes it more easy to read. So what other areas can you think about? GitLab has been absolutely invaluable, for example, tracking code, change control, automatically deploying things with Ansible and tracking it over time. What improvements have we made? We can see all of that plotted out through the various bits of monitoring that we have. Sensu also does a large amount of notifications, manages our notifications so that we know what to report on, what to monitor, what systems have had an outage or a failure. Hopefully none, but they've got to be realistic. So some tools about web. WordPress Scanner, when I was a pen tester a few years ago, we used to use WP Scan. WordPress then bought it, so it marks its own homework, but it's still a valuable tool to keep track of WordPress environments. WordPress is a terrific tool for creating websites, and it presents you the full web design and hosting all in one package. But unfortunately, has had lots of high value, high impact vulnerabilities, and they're a massive source of shadow IT. And so over time, things get lost, and then they are out of date, and that data can be compromised and affect the CIA triad. So have a look at WordPress Scanner. Mmap is still a tool that's used daily by my team, and it can take a little bit of learning to get used to, but it helps identify ports that you think you have configured, and are they open, or have you made things too open? I must suggest that you use Mmap to help with that. There's lots of advice on YouTube, but I'm recommending that we have maybe an Mmap masterclass at the next security conference. Showdown can be effective. It's normally around 10 days behind, but again, it helps if you type in your IP address or your domain name, then you can identify what the internet thinks or sees about your systems. Maybe some information about certificates, maybe some information about SSH that you have published, or if you think you've turned the features off, then a little bit later you can check whether they have been successfully isolated if you're not feeling too confident with Mmap. When spinning up new web servers, it would be preferable to have a build image that has hardened capability already in it. But if you're running out of time, then at least searching for that web host technology like Nginx and best practices or hardening, that's going to help you build those images to start with. And as you get more experience with setting up security headers, then these are the areas that will help you with that. CIS benchmarks will enable you to download or pre-made images of operating systems, or at least evaluate your systems so that you can work out if you want how they are hardened. We would recommend at the very least you work towards level 1 CIS benchmarks, but that's not the end of the world if you only can achieve some of them. But if you aim for one, and then you can make decisions on whether you want to keep them or not. As you make things more secure, the less available they are. So you'll need to make a risk-based decision on whether you want to enable that hardening or not per configuration. And SSL Labs and the security headers websites with URLs there on the screen will help you evaluate some of those systems. Right, a little bit about DNS. We have Jisc, the primary name server, service secondary, and we have JNRS for protective DNS, and I'll tell you a little bit about network time in just a moment. If you are confident or happy running your primary name servers, then that's completely fine. I would recommend you take a secondary name server from us or from anybody else, so that in the event of some sort of ransomware or compromise, if you lose your primary name servers, somebody else has a copy of your zone. In our case, if we have a copy of your zone in our secondary name servers, then we can clone that and put it in our primary and put your services back online within a short period of time during an incident. Even if we want to point it to something else, like a hosting page or a holding page or a quick summary of, we'll be back later, then at the very least, we can help you with that. Protected DNS, I'll talk to you about with an extra couple of slides in a moment. And network time, for those that perhaps didn't catch my earlier presentation on in person, we now have some increased capability in network time on Janet. So if you use NTP 0to4.ja.net, that's going to help synchronize your systems, but please do use more than one to maintain resiliency, like you might have 2 internet connections. As we work through maintaining NTP, if that service goes down, then clearly, obviously, you'll have an outage on time. So please configure more than one. So here's a few quick commands on DNS. The dig command is something I use every day. So if you do a dig and then your domain in Linux and then add any plus multi, which gives it a nice formatting, so it's been a bit easier to read, then you can have a look at the SOA and the records that you've configured for your MX records and your text records. Please bear in mind, this is what you've configured in public. This is what other people can see too. So don't go around, deleting them willy-nilly. Make sure you know what it is that you're removing or tidying up, but also consider what it is that you're showing there. So if we were to have a look at the expiration, for example, and for the primary name server service, we have 5 weeks, 6 days, and 16 hours. But you need to think about if you've configured yours in your primary to be maybe a day or 3 or 5 or a week, then can you rebuild your primary name server, bring it all back online following an incident during Christmas, over a bank holiday, within that time frame? That's how long you're defining yourself to be online for. Otherwise, your secondaries will stop working once that expiry time occurs. For those that haven't got some Linux boxes up their sleeves, then a PowerShell equivalent or close equivalent to dig is resolve-DNS name. So here's the DNS structure of all our systems of primary name server service, the domain registry service for those that have ac.uk, and JNRS, our protective DNS service. So as you make a request as an end user, your systems will forward that DNS request through a resolver. In this drawing, it's the Janet Network Resolver service. And at each stage, as it recursively makes its way through the DNS tree, it goes to Nominet, who operate .uk, and we haven't blocked them yet. They're still safe to use. Then the request is allowed through. It goes to ac.uk, to the domain registry service, again, safe to use, and then moves to Jisc, again, hopefully safe to use, and it allows that request through. But if we were to be looking at something potentially malicious, you can see as it goes through Nominet and through to a malicious website, then as JNRS has that domain listed as something unsafe, it prevents you from accessing it. From my point of view, that is effective. It's the last part of a DNS, last part of an attack being blocked right at the last stage of the process. Your antivirus hasn't picked it up, your EDR, your application control, your user management, all of the different things, layers of security that you've put through. The final stage is, say, some ransomware is deployed and it goes and fires off to a command and control website to activate and deploy the ransomware encryption. It's blocked right at the last step in the network resolver. So a little bit about network time. Yep, please configure between 2 and 4 local time sources distributed throughout your estate. We have NTP 0, NTP 1, 2, 3, and 4.ja.net. If you want to get in touch with us to set that up, then please do so via help@jisc.ac.uk. We would recommend to use the NTP DNS names, not the IP addresses. So please check your configuration. That way we can make changes to our systems, and we have some planned this year. We have 5 feeds at the moment, 7 feeds at the moment. 5 of them are using radio technology and GPS technology, but these things can be interfered with. And that's been demonstrated, unfortunately, heavily in some various wars that are going on at the moment. So we actually now have some new feeds from the National Physics Laboratory for terrestrial feeds for time over fibre. And interestingly, when we look at the time accuracy over time, we can see the radio waves are a little bit more sort of inconsistent, although it's still very precise. Our radio waves are much tighter. Our fibre feeds are much tighter. So we make sure that we monitor our time stability, and we'll also be bringing some of those feeds available to users later on next year. I had a chat with the head of security operations, Paul Nee, and he wanted to reiterate the 2 most common initial vectors for compromise that he's seen and had to respond to in CSIRT. So compromised credentials targeting remote access, VPN solutions, that sort of thing, and exploitation of public vulnerabilities, which has had dramatic increase over the last 12 months. We've seen big push on SSH. Just because SSH has the word secure in it doesn't mean it's secure. By default, its configuration is rather open. If compromised credentials are working, then that's going to just jump you straight through SSH. Bit like where I was talking about Nginx, if you type in SSH hardening, you'll find a range of config changes. It's probably 5 or 10 lines to alter, where you can improve its configuration, blocking root access, using SSH keys instead of passwords, but remember to turn passwords off, enable MFA. These are things that are not particularly challenging to do. It's just sort of using keywords in Google or web searching to help you with that. So benchmarking and hardening can be tools to help you with that. And please make sure you use separate credentials with separate passwords for administrative access, and not a password with just a 1 on the end, so your original password and a small change. These compromised credentials are often slightly varied or adjusted to attack. Network segmentation is really important, and only provide access to those that need it. So here's a few tools that I've found. I'll copy and paste these into the discussion forum in a few minutes. If you want to just take a moment or take a screenshot of that, that might be enough to get through. But things like Snipe IT is a IT asset management software. It's open source, it's free. That will help you cover warranty periods and when you bought it to help you track that. And Netbox is also useful to manage things like IP addresses. And then sort of lastly, a quick reminder of the tools that we have here at Jisc, so we can move on to some questions if there are some, Paul.
Thank you, Ben. At the moment, there aren't any questions as much, but I think Charles mentioned the problem was between the keyboard and the chair. I don't know if that was more maybe
that was
picture.
Thank you very much. I could not remember the blooming word at that precise minute. Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely I'm a picnic today.
One thing I was going to ask is obviously clearly mentioned there that JNRS or protective DNS is part of the membership. How easy is it to enable? I think some of the, how easy is it to switch that on as a service?
Brilliant, thank you. That's a great question. So for JNRS, you can send an email to help@jisc.ja.net. Oh gosh, JA, I haven't done that for a long time. help@jisc.ac.uk, and ask for JNRS. Our engineers will get in touch with you. If you have a pretty ordinary account, then we can give you some a pretty ordinary infrastructure, we can turn that on through your forwarder capability in a domain controller. We know your IP ranges already. We can guide you through the whole process, and you'd have immediate security benefits within a few days. It isn't very difficult. A little bit more complex, then there's a little bit of thought involved. One of the major universities who had a compromise last year was onboarded within the week, and they had a massive infrastructure.
How it's probably me not being technical, so apologise here in terms of doing it, but how JNRS in terms of blocking stuff in terms of example, why is it such a benefit?
Why is it such a benefit? Not only are we taking a range of known malicious website feeds from commercial providers and the NCSC, we also have feeds from CSERT and what they see within attacks purely within our sector. We can take the information that we learn about others that have been compromised and implement them into JNRS. So there's a sort of herd mentality. The protection or the information that we learn about other colleges on JNRS, we can then feed into JNRS and prevent it happening to others.
Brilliant. No, thank you. I don't think there's any more questions. I don't know if anyone would like to put any in the chat, or if you got any further questions.
I'm just quickly copying all of the various hyperlinks in, so you guys can copy them out.
Cool. No, we can't see any more questions. So once again, Ben, thanks for giving that and pointing out. Oh, there is one just come in.
Oh, good timing.
Just good timing. Do you have any advice for best practice with regards to handling login accounts for third-party companies who need to access resources in an organization to be able to provide remote support?
Okay, so for contractors, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to very quickly do this copy and pasting. I can't do both at the same time. I'm sorry, this isn't as smooth as I normally have these. Libra, Netbox, one more. MX Toolbox. So for contractors, make sure that they live within their own OU, so they're easily identified. When they're onboarded, make sure you know when they are going to finish their employment, so that the accounts immediately tear down or automatically tear down. I think specifically was the question logging such information?
Yes, it's practice with regards to handling logging accounts for third-party companies who need access to resources in the organisation to be able to provide remote support on their supplied services.
Don't treat them any differently, but just make sure that they're tagged and easily identified as contractors. So perhaps an OU within Active Directory, something like that. But if you treat them separately, then you'll end up losing track of them. If you treat them with the same, and ensure that they only have access to what they need access to, but from your logging that you already have implemented, then they're going to automatically fall into the same logging processes.
We've got one from Holly who just said, is JNRS comparable to PDNS?
Yes, it's essentially the same thing. Protective DNS, that's what JNRS is. We're trying to get some of our documentation improved a little bit to flag that. But yes, the JNRS is a protective DNS like PDNS. NCSC run one called PDNS, and it has very, very similar feeds.
And just one quickly before we wrap up, Pete's just asked in here, how frequently are we seeing DNS attacks on the network currently?
It's used in all sorts of different ways. So DNS is used often for exfiltration because port 53 is often already, has to be enabled as a port through your firewall for DNS to function. So it's used there. It's often used with bad configuration to create denial of service attacks. There's something called dangling DNS. Forgive the name, but Google it. Dangling DNS. You'll find that those that have old domains or domains that are pointed to, say, AWS's automatically generated DNS names for a CNAME, you can then, and you stop running that cloud service, then another user can come along and create that exact same DNS name in AWS now that you've stopped using it, and you've now got a nice branded dodgy website. So yeah, please have a look at dangling DNS.
Cool. We've run out of time, but we will just get back to this one, I think. But effectively, it's PDNS has the ability to be used outside the LAN, if you like. So if they didn't know if there's any plans for JNRS.
There is. Yeah, we've got plans next year for some improvements to that. In the meantime, you can solve it with always on VPN. Granted, you might need a reasonably beefy VPN for that, especially if you want to enable it to all 30,000 students or something. But at least consider it for your high value users.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Ben, for an insightful presentation and just reinforcing just the support that is available out there, both free and part of your membership.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.